shuffle on the room when you get to it.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming here. I think the Deputy Prime Minister is still speaking, and so you've picked us, but so thanks for that. So we have got a session today on making the ambitions achievable. How can Labour government channel private investment into meeting its renewable energy targets? We all know how vital sustainable energy is going to be to not just rebuilding our country, but meeting our net zero targets, and also making sure we skill up the next generation of workers in this country. So on our panel today, we have Mark Owen-Lloyd, the Director of Photovolt Development Partners, who's kindly sponsoring today's event. We've got Dan Norris, the MP for West England, and coming on in, just as a grand entrance, we've got Oliver Coppard, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, to add their thoughts to today's discussion. So I'll just open by handing over to Mark, who can just tell you a bit about Photovolt, and then we'll go along the panel and allow the panellists to introduce themselves. We'll then do a Q&A amongst ourselves, and then we'll open it to questions from the floor, and then we'll get out of here on time. So thank you very much. I'll just hand over to Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us for this event today. My name is Mark Owen-Lloyd. I'm an energy trader by profession. I used to run power trading at E.ON Energy Trading in Coventry, and then strangely in Dusseldorf, where we moved it to. When I was there, I used to turn Ratcliffe-on-Soar on and off as the dark spread moved in and out of the money. And right this week, Ratcliffe-on-Soar has burnt its final kilo of coal. So it's a really momentous time as we completely change what we're doing in this country. We still have gas. But what I'm doing now is I'm working for a Berlin-based company that's got 12 utility-scale solar farms in the pipeline in the UK, the first of which, Botley West, just north of Oxford, on land owned by the Blenheim Estate, is currently going through its development consent order process. So I'd be very happy after our panellists have spoken to answer any questions you have about that and what we do. We would have, that pipeline represents approximately £12 billion worth of investment into the UK if we get DCOs for each of them.
I'll just hand over to Dan next.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, look, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you. My name is Dan Norris. I am the Regional Mayor for the West of England, which includes Bristol, Bath and the surrounding areas, about 1 million people. I'm also the MP for North East Somerset and Hanham. I managed to get Mogsit done, and thank you for all your help. I felt it was a public service personally, but there you are. So look, this is a very important subject because there isn't the money for government to be able to do all the things that need to be done. It's going to require private investment. And how do you get private investment? Well, first of all, it's like building a relationship. It's like courtship, really, isn't it? You start talking to one another. You start understanding one another. You start enticing one another. And that's where mayors like me and Oliver and the other regional mayors and government have to be able to help the private sector invest by getting over some of the initial hurdles, which is always difficult for them. And I just, for example, as regional mayor, introduced a fund that we're aiming for 100 million in total, where we will put up 10 million in order to lever in that extra 90. And that's the way you need to do it, because I don't have the resource, Oliver doesn't have the resource, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment, to do all the vast number of things that we so importantly need to do, yet we're going to have to, if you genuinely believe, like I, and I'm sure many of you in the room, that there is a climate emergency, we need to be acting yesterday. We haven't done enough of that, so we're going to have to move super fast now, and we're going to have to do that with partners, and that includes the private sector. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Oliver.
Thank you. I should start off by saying I've never timed anything that well in my entire life. It's a grand entrance indeed. So the reason I was late was because I was in Angela's speech, which I'll come on to in a moment. So as you've just heard, I'm the Mayor of South Yorkshire, Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster and Sheffield. And South Yorkshire lost out on the last energy transition quite spectacularly. So you'll know that South Yorkshire was the home of the coal mining industry, essentially, and when that coal mining industry was destroyed in the 1980s, South Yorkshire's communities were ripped apart. And I am absolutely determined that the next energy transition is something that we take advantage of, that drives growth and jobs and opportunity in South Yorkshire. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we've seen huge successes in that space already. We've just been selected by Holtec as the home for their SMR manufacturing facility. That's a £1.5 billion investment should they be down selected by the government through the GBN competition. ITM Power, one of the biggest hydrogen electrolyser factories in the country, is based in South Yorkshire. Rolls-Royce, Boeing, all based in South Yorkshire because of our expertise, partly the University of Sheffield, #1 engineering department in the country. The AMRC, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District, is the #1 in the world of its kind, first and best innovation district in the world. So we absolutely have a plan in South Yorkshire to drive growth through net zero, but as Dan says, we do need private sector investment in order to get that done, but we are already bringing that private sector investment into the region, and part of the way we're doing that is through our investment zone. South Yorkshire is the UK's first investment zone, and Angela in her speech just confirmed 2 new investment zones, which means that those plans will continue, and we will be able to continue driving growth through the advanced manufacturing IZ that we have in South Yorkshire. And that is hugely important because it is devolution that is going to drive this agenda. Me being able to look people in the eye when I make decisions, work with investors like Holtec to bring that investment into the UK, is exactly how it currently works. I think we also need to learn the lessons from places like the US, where they have used huge federal investments through the IRA to really drive the private sector investment, which is now creating a beneficial cycle in this space and really changing the US and the transition to green energy through that federal investment. And the UK, I think, has a lot to learn in that space. And then last but not least, I would say we also need to have a greater amount of capacity, as Dan points out, in the MCAs, particularly around financial mechanisms and an understanding of how to drive financial investments into the UK, into our regions, that allow us to unlock the potential of those net zero investments, because at the moment we don't always have that capacity, that skills base, that expertise in place, and we could work with the Treasury or we could work with the private sector to drive that, but either way we do need greater capacity in place in order to make sure that we are able to access that finance, which is out there absolutely and looking for a home. And South Yorkshire has the biggest clean tech sector in the country, and it absolutely should be coming into our communities as a result.
Great, thank you. So I'll just start a kind of panel discussion now. I'll probably just pick up on the point that you just made there, Oliver, around devolution and around how can this government help regions leverage in the investment that they need, because obviously renewable energy is cheaper than our traditional sources, but actually to get the infrastructure projects and stuff off the ground, I'm sure it's much more expensive for companies like Photovolt. So I'll just start with you, Dan. What do you think the government can do to give you the leverage and the kind of flexibility you need to bring in the investment that's needed for this?
I'm sure Oliver will say the same, and we'll probably speak off one sheet, but what we need is kind of knowing when resources are coming in on a longer term basis so we can plan, because everything's about planning, especially for these kind of things, and that's what's been the problem. The last government made money available, to their credit. It's not often I can praise them, but they did do that, but they did it in such a way that it made it almost impossible to use it in a way that you could sort of plan for longer term future and investment. So that would be really good, and so settlements that are over a series of time, a duration of time, and known in advance will make a big difference. And then that allows us to get the benefits, not just of the obvious ones, but also the job creation that is going to happen. Because I believe that the potential for green new jobs is amazing, not just because of what it does for the planet, but because of the quality of work that provides for people. Exciting, interesting, engaging work that is well paid, that will make a difference not just to the individuals and their families, but our communities and the nation as a whole. I think it's a very exciting time, but we do definitely need to know what's going to come our way in order to make those important plans, because if we don't make wise decisions, don't get the very best possible decision making going, we're going to miss out and misuse that money, or it won't have maximum impact. So I think that's probably what I'd say. And also, whenever I'm with another mayor, I always try and avoid the bidding war. I've just heard how fantastic South Yorkshire is, so I'm going to resist telling you how fantastic the West of England is.
Admits defeat already, which is
I always think it's a bit like the stamps. You don't have to put Great Britain on the stamps. We just have the monarch's head, and it's a bit like that with the West of England.
I'll throw the same question over to Mark from the other side of the fence, rather than from a mayor's perspective, but from an investor's perspective. What do you think the government could do? And I'll then go back over to Oliver to round off.
Well, before these two fall out really badly,
that's why I went to you next.
There is plenty for both of you, and you may have a short lead over at the moment, but no, there is plenty, because the great thing about solar farms, you need a lot of land. All renewables, you need land. And it's diversified. So we're building these all over the country, which is part of the controversy. We used to generate our electricity in the Trent Valley. Suddenly we're putting it in Suffolk, in the west, in rural areas, and this causes consternation. But that's what, as a developer, you have to deal with. This. What my job at Photovolt is to deal with the public engagement. In terms of the government, it's consistency and openness and honesty of message. You know, the irony of what Edward Miliband is doing at the moment is he is actually following to the letter the energy policy that was established by the previous government. So all the personal attacks on him, he's simply applying the national policy statements which were derogated in February. And that's all, as a developer, you ask. The deal is we do the development consent order, we take the risk based upon the infrastructure that the government asks for. The NPSs say we want solar, which is described as critical national priority. So all we want is straight, this is what it is. And I think the other thing government can do is stress the economic benefit here, as both of you have. It is a net zero story, but we've got 12 projects connecting over the next 12 years. Each one takes about 3,000 people to build. That's an enormous amount of employment in a technical, skilled industry. So there is a huge, and of course the cheaper and reliable power supply. So there's a huge economic story here, which might be easier to sell to people than the net zero, I think.
And what do you think, Oliver?
Well, I think the government needs to do probably three things. One, recognise the expertise that exists in this country and then leverage that expertise to bring in the private sector investment. Like I say, we've got the world's first and best advanced manufacturing innovation district in South Yorkshire. That is not just a South Yorkshire asset or a northern asset, that is a national asset. And so recognising that and driving growth through those assets is hugely important. And right across, particularly the north, I would argue there are those strengths, and we need that investment in order to grow the economy of the north. And to use an out-of-date phrase, level up. So, first and foremost, recognise that expertise, and that's for me what the growth plans are about. So allowing us, secondly, to coordinate across the country where we have strengths. For instance, in SMR technology, I don't want to be in competition with other mayors, other regions. As Dan says, the bidding war is very real, and we don't want to get into that space. So here in Merseyside, we obviously have kind of the opportunity to drive a tidal barrier, which could power thousands of homes, not just here, but across the broader northwest. The government should be looking at that. We should all, as northern mayors and mayors in general, be able to say to investors, if you want to invest in tidal power, come to the northwest, and we should sell it on that basis. And then thirdly, linked to that point, I think the government also has to work out how to avoid a bidding war with companies as well. So when companies come to the UK and say, we would like to invest in place, rather than me competing with Dan to say what is the investment, what is the money I can give to you to come and invest in South Yorkshire, and I say 10 million and Dan says 12 million, actually the government needs to intervene in that space so that actually we're driving growth for the whole of the country and not competing with each other in order to get that investment through the door.
We need a plan.
We need a plan. So I just kind of moving on to how we need to decarbonise the grid. We need to make sure that that it's not just sort of isolated projects, it is a joined up national effort. But how do we do that, do you think, without placing undue burden on the taxpayer and leaving them to foot the bill for what are massive infrastructure projects that also the private sector will benefit from?
Well, the fact there are 15 solar NSIPs, National Significant Infrastructure Projects, on Planning Inspectorate's website right now, without any government money involved in that whatsoever. We have to pay the Planning Inspectorate for all their time. To do a DCO, Development Consent Order, it's about 5 years' work and £12 million. And if you don't get a DCO, you just have to walk away. So there's a huge amount of private investment there. The way to ensure that it all, and it'll cost us about £1 billion to build Botley West, most of which will come from international infrastructure funds. So there's a wall of money looking to come to what is a very attractive investment case in the UK. But the way the government can ensure that flows is to make sure that the friction that's there at the moment is removed. So the mixed messaging we've had for the last year until this government about whether DCOs were going to be granted or not, that Sunaka DCO, which was delayed for no reason for over a year, you feel for the developer there. And then local authorities, all my local authorities in Oxfordshire have declared climate emergencies, but they all oppose us, and which is astonishing. In private, their prowess because of the growth story and the fact that Oxfordshire's grid is absolutely at capacity, and Mini Oxford can't build the electric Mini because there's no power available. So these kind of frictions, maybe helping local authorities to set up areas where to have a planning policy, so solar's approved there, not approved there, to have an industrial and growth strategy, which Oxfordshire absolutely doesn't have. There's no county plan. They've failed to agree amongst the district councils. And then the planning inspectorate, which is underfunded, and National Grid, which means needs a lot of money to invest in all the plumbing that we need to get the power to where it's needed. And taking ESO, electricity supply operations, into public ownership is a very good step. That was needed.
I was going to throw that off, throw that to both of you as mayors. I mean, that talk of friction. I mean, as politicians, we're the ones who have to sort of make the case and take the sort of the heat for things. But should there not be more the private sector can do to help us balance that?
Can I just come back on the point around the taxpayer paying for things? Because this is one of my huge frustrations. The taxpayer is paying regardless, right? The taxpayer is paying through lost opportunity as much as it is paying through our taxes to create new jobs and growth, right? And for every time we lose an investment as a result of the grid not being invested in, prices go up, costs go up, unemployment goes up, etc., etc., etc. So the taxpayer is on the hook. The choice in front of us as politicians, and therefore on behalf of the taxpayer, is do we invest in the long term to create jobs and growth and opportunity to make sure that people can access that opportunity, can have lower bills, can have better jobs, can drive industrial growth, or do we say we're just going to keep on throwing good money after bad in the old industries, in petrol, in diesel, in investing, in importing energy from abroad? That's the choice. There is no other choice. We don't get to make a choice as to whether or not we are going to spend money. Our choice is how we spend that money on behalf of our communities and on behalf of taxpayers, and that is the real kind of choice in front of us, and we should acknowledge that rather than simply saying the taxpayer is going to have to fork out for investments in net zero. Frankly, we're on the hook regardless.
Yeah, well, I agree with what Oliver said, but what I say is I think also needs a flexibility of thinking in terms of what private investment can be, because there's not just one kind of private investment, there's lots of different kinds. Yeah, can you hear? Can someone turn it right? I'll talk louder. Okay. So what I was saying was I think there's lots of different ways of investing privately, and working out how to do that and being flexible is really, really important. Now, in Lawrence Weston, which is a part of Bristol, some of you may know it, there is the largest wind turbine in England. Sorry to do the bragging thing. But what's important about it is actually it's a community initiative. Okay, that the profits from that go to the local community to build, community centres and various other things. So the communities there are involved in it. They have a say in it. They help bring it about. They're now benefiting from it. That's not the usual model. That's quite rare. But as a proud cooperative party member, for example, I think what a great idea, because what we need is investment wherever it can come from, because the challenge is so big, and however it can be done, we should embrace, provided it's done properly and well, of course.
So just kind of a final question for the panel before we go to the floor. So what do you then think as Metro Mayors, what extra powers do you feel that you need then to do this? Our
favourite question. What extra powers do Metro Mayors?
How long have we got? Not very long, a couple of minutes. In a couple of minutes, what extra powers do you think you would need to really superpower your areas to do this?
So it's not just powers, it's capacity. So batteries included, please. So when the government give us responsibilities, they should also give us the capacity to deliver against those responsibilities. So when it comes to planning, my team is 3 people. I need more people to deliver on planning reform if that's what the government want me to do. I want to do those things, but the government need to give us the help to be able to deliver that in terms of capacity. So that's absolutely crucial. I would like to see more of a devolution of education, because I think when it comes to getting access to those jobs that we are creating in the region, we're going to need skilled people from our region to access them, and therefore we need to be able to kind of tailor the education system, not just the adult skills system, in order to allow those young people currently growing up in South Yorkshire to stay near and go far, to get those green jobs of the future, and that's fundamentally important. So I would particularly point to those 2 areas in terms of if the government want us to do this stuff. And then again, as I say, I think in terms of the coordination between mayors, that's not necessarily about additional powers, that's about making sure that as mayors we're able to work together in a complementary way through a national industrial strategy, which is driven by a series of regional industrial strategies, and therefore allow us all to sing to our own song about what we're great at, rather than competing with each other.
Yeah, I'd add to that, what we need is a real trust in democracy, because what we have with combined authorities is a huge bureaucracy and a complexity that you would not believe, or maybe you would. And so, for example, in my area, where it's a very balanced political makeup, it's not Labour controlled. I don't have any Labour councillors in my area, Labour council controlled councillors in my area, for example. That creates a lot of tension, because I have opposition for opposition's sake, irrespective of how good the idea may be. So what I'd like is the government to give resource, and Oliver's not going to disagree with that, and powers direct to mayors, and let them be held accountable to the people every 4 years.
Yeah.
And they can then we can get on with stuff, because what we've been blooming good at in this country is learning how to say no and resist and reject things. And what we haven't been very good at is saying, right, we're going to go for this, we thought it through, that's what we're going to do. And that's what's got to change. And I think that's what the Labour government is saying, in fact, in an awful lot of what it's been talking about in the last year or so.
Well, I'm going to just throw it open to the floor now, and then I'll try to take them as three, or should I I'll take them in rounds of three. So this gentleman, and then the gentleman, and then this gentleman.
Tony Carroll, West Midlands Labour Party. There was an article in the Times yesterday, connection delays are the biggest barrier to renewable energy, 15-year delays. It's just ridiculous, it's longer than the Conservatives' route. How are we going to get over that?
Hi, I'm Ed. I want you to lift the lid a bit on how all this works, particularly in relation to the civil service. We're hearing in the media how Labour and the civil service are going to get on a lot better than previous set of politicians. And when you talk about the government, are you talking about kind of senior Labour politicians, or are you talking about actually just dealing with civil servants? And do you find them to be actually a benefit and a resource that's really on your side, or another barrier to overcome?
No, it's just this one.
Cheers, Tom Lang, Croydon, UK. I'm glad Dan managed to get in and talk about community energy, because I was going to say it hadn't been part of your conversation, but you made it. It was community energy and what you believe in terms of community shares, and how do we think we unlock the capital there so that community energy can better raise capital from communities, having community buy-in, and raise the private equity needs to run their projects.
Great. So that was around, I think something, a question around delays, how the civil service helped to facilitate all of this, and then a question around community energy. So I'll probably go to you first, Dan, around delay and sort of what you think there.
It's a combination, really. There is an enormous amount of renewables in the pipeline. So there's 500 gigawatt, 500,000 megawatts queuing, and that has caused the grid, national grid itself, which 10 years ago used to get 5 connection applications a year. It got 72 in December alone. So it's resourced the national grid and changing the way it operates, which it is rapidly, but it needs more people, and it needs a better way of connecting people, and it also needs the substations to connect. For example, our project, they're building a brand new substation for us, a new full 100 kilovolt substation. That requires a lot of persuasion of Ofgem to allow them to do that. And the second thing that slows down connections is resource at the planning inspectorate. It's absolutely under pressure and under-resourced, and a DCO, which used to take 2 years, now takes 5 years. So those all need addressing, and they're not hard to do. And to be fair, Grid is addressing those, and the government is, with the ESOs being taken into public hands. But there's a lot to do, because if we're going to get to 2030, we need to put 35 gigawatts of solar and similar of wind onto the grid by 2030. Well, right now that's not going to happen, because there aren't enough projects in the pipeline. So all of those things need to be fixed in the next 6 months.
Wow. So questions around, so I guess like, how you work with your officers. It might be a good, none of us here are ministers in the government, so we can't really tell you how those relationships work, but how you work with your officers might be a good thing to sort of start with. And then the questions around community energy and what your plans are for your areas, really.
Okay, well, community energy, more of the same, because we've started and we've got a really, a recognised approach to doing it, and we want to keep developing it and learning and getting better. But it started off very well, and I think it's excited a lot of people because it shows what's possible and how you can achieve things. And there's nothing better than an example to point out if you want to do things in the future. In terms of offices, well, that is a really interesting question. I'm going to have to really be careful what I say, I'm afraid. Look, what I think, and I think, Oliver, you've raised this as well in other meetings when we joined together on platforms. I want to see more sort of swapping out of offices, local government offices, regional government offices, and civil servants in London, so that the civil servants in London can see exactly what goes on in the local patches, because I don't think they are totally clued up, if I'm honest, and I think that is very important that you be able to do that. But similarly, I think that some of the challenges that I have is that the offices that I've got in my region, they're not clued up to how government works centrally well enough. And I think that needs to dovetail really, really tightly in order to make sure that, the limited capacity that Oliver was rightly talking about is maximised. Now, what can I say about it? I mean, my frustration as a mayor, the biggest frustration, I'd love to know what you think actually, or we haven't talked about this, but what I've found is that I'm constantly chasing for delivery all the time. And the whole organisation pushes back because they want to go at a certain pace, and they find it difficult. But that's exactly why politicians are in organisations, because it's to not work at the pace that the organisation wants. It's to make sure that people's needs are met through that conduit of a politician. So I am very, very keen that we do anything we can to assist with delivery pace, because what worries me about the fantastic programme that the Labour government is now going to be trying to implement is that there's only so long the public will have patience unless there's really good delivery. And yet I think we're vulnerable, not to our will or our desire or our energy or our focus, but actually because the system, whether it's poor coordination between Whitehall and the regions and local government or whatever it might be, but it will delay delivery, and then people will get frustrated, and they're already cynical about politics, whatever we might think they are, and that includes us, I'm afraid. So we've got to get delivery, and I think that's anything that can speed delivery, fantastic.
Well, just very briefly on grid, you just need to invest. I mean, it will just be a huge barrier to growth if we don't, and so investment is the only way through that problem. And then in terms of civil service, look, I have always found the civil service to be a huge asset to us. That has improved over the last 80 days. So I've had more engagement with the government, with civil service in the last 80 days than I did in my first 2 years as mayor. And that's been driven by the government committing to devolution and saying to their teams, this is hugely important. Now, are there challenges there? Of course. There are very real challenges in some departments because some of these things are really hard to devolve. It's not an easy thing to do, to change how government works and how the structures of government fit together. But the civil service are working with us hugely closely. We've got really good relationships in MHCLG. In particular, we're working increasingly closely with the DFT because obviously we've got Louise Haig in the region. So the civil service are there with us, trying to work through some of these problems and challenges, and I'm really grateful for their support. On community energy, I've just been having this conversation with the co-op, so Joe Fortune, a good friend of mine. So, the government have committed to doubling the size of the co-op sector. South Yorkshire's previously had an ownership hub. We're really keen to do that sort of stuff, but again, it comes back to capacity. I would like to see a team within the Treasury being able to drive that ambition. So we have a team within the Treasury set up to try and drive co-ops and employee-owned businesses, mutuals, etc. Because it's only through getting that sort of investment in a team who are then going to work with us through our growth plans that we're going to see that real unlocking of co-ops and community energy in particular.
Wonderful. Okay, next round of questions. So anyone else?
Could we please have some gender balanced questions?
Any women? Anyone? No? Okay. Sorry.
Hello, Alex, CLP Chair from Yorkshire and energy lawyer, not a woman, sorry. Great to hear you talk about community energy. Question for both sides of the panel, I'd say. What role can GB Energy have in both crowding in funding, which is important but limited, let's be honest, and also perhaps acting as some sort of security or guarantee around bankability to ensure that funding comes into projects, both at this small community level and the massive solar level as well?
Go start first.
Yeah, I still don't know precisely what GB Energy is going to do in actual terms on the ground, but in terms of showing willing and making people feel confident in what the UK is doing. I would say it's a really positive step. For example, our shareholders, when I told them that it had been done, were all encouraged and gave us the green light on 4 more projects. So it's a very good thing politically. How it works on the ground is to be seen. I suspect where it will work well is in smaller local schemes and, for example, community energy schemes, which often need some pump priming to get them going. We've got a community energy scheme alongside ours, and that took 2 or 3 years to get off the ground, and now it's much loved locally and is helping people feel more comfortable about our much larger schemes. So I think that's where GB Energy will have the biggest role.
I don't have that much to add, to be honest, because I'm waiting to hear a lot of the detail too. So I think, one of the things that Rishi Sunak did was he kind of forced everything at a pace, and I think we were hoping to hear a little bit more to be able to expand on it. But what I think is the important thing is that the tone is a different tone. Oliver talked about the speed and the change that's happened since his Labour, and that's what you need. You need facilitation. You need that ability for people to talk to one another, even though they've got differences. They also have common ground, and they can build on that. It's the approach, it's the attitude. The Tories talked a fantastic environmental fight. They just never did it, did they? This is what we're going to do. I hope it's different.
Okay. So we just have 2 more questions.
Sorry, can I just come back up on that question about GB Energy? So in South Yorkshire, we've established something called SME4Labour Energy, which includes some of our big industrial partners, Rolls-Royce, Forge Masters, who are now nationalised, but creating some of the nuclear infrastructure, both for the AUKUS sub-deal, but civil nuclear besides. And we've done that as a means of both kind of working with private sector, driving projects, and then hopefully docking into GB Energy. But let me say, kind of, there's one practical thing that I think the government can do, which at the moment is not part of their planning, which is, in for instance, the nuclear competition that they're currently going through to down select for companies who want to build the next generation of nuclear facilities in this country. There is no mandated British manufacturing component within that competition. So actually the government, if they want to drive supply chains in this country, if they want to drive investment in this country, and they want to drive skills in this country, which I know they do, should look again at the rules around that competition, and indeed any sort of investments that the government are making going forward, to actually mandate the fact that they have to have much more of a British-built capability within that infrastructure. Because when we built the offshore wind capability in this country, we didn't do that, and a lot of the manufacturing went to, for instance, Denmark. Now, there's always going to have to be a balance between cost and British-built infrastructure, because to a certain extent, if you go and build this stuff in the Czech Republic, it will be cheaper and therefore will drive down energy costs. But longer term, we have to think about this stuff more holistically, because actually the returns to the taxpayer when it comes to skills, when it comes to investment, when it comes to growth, etc., are obviously well known, and so we should think about that more in the round, in my view.
So we've just got 2 final questions. Lady here.
Thank you, Sophie Gunter. I just wanted to make the point about net zero, data centre cooling technology. That is the one thing that we can do, which there is British technology. I work with a company called U Systems, part of Legrand. They're in Bedford. If we applied their data centre cooling technology to all the data centres in this country, we would achieve net zero with that one action alone. If they can reduce energy consumption by up to 90%. So I just wanted to make that point and suggest we all look at data centre cooling technology as the most important thing to achieve net zero.
Okay, and then just put your hands up here.
Thank you. So, Lorraine Beavers, MP for Blackpool North and Fleetwood. So, I've long championed a scheme in my local area, which is a tidal barrage, using the power of the sea to create electricity. So I've got a gentleman who's always championed this and says that he's got the investors, he just needs government backing, and then it's all go. But then, since being elected, I've been approached by somebody who wants to build 4 nuclear power stations on the local enterprise zone, the smaller sort of power stations, but he needs the government to be guarantors. What's that about? You know, so just as a thing. And because he's got all the investment as well, so I'm taking it all in. I obviously, you know, I want cheap electricity, I want industry to come. The area that I represent is very deprived, all the industry's gone. If I can deliver cheap electricity to industry, industry will come, we get better jobs, and that's what we're about in the Labour Party, empowering people and communities. But I'm just wondering, especially with the nuclear power station, it's very feasible. This man's worked all his life, he made a lot of money working in the nuclear industry across the world. You know, he's got his own company. I'm very impressed. Just, is this what we're going to be doing with GB Energy, you know, as a movement? Are we going to be guarantors for all of this investment, you know? Because we all know that we need nuclear as well as we need the power of the sea. And we're an island, and I've never understood why we don't use the power of the sea to create electricity. We're surrounded by water. Anyway, thank you.
I suppose I will throw over to Dan. Maybe you can give us a bit more of a broader idea around, you know, if you're an investor and you're looking, you've got a project, you've got a good track record, you know, where do you go and how do you kind of get access to these things? And I think that the other point around data cooling centers, I mean, maybe there are other ideas and other things that are out there that we should be looking at as a government, really.
I think the first thing we do is stop saving our photos on our phones. We could halve the number of data centres. It's a very good point. On what you said about tidal energy, absolutely. I'm from Swansea in South Wales. We actually there was a DCO awarded for the Swansea Tidal Lagoon, and the government refused to prime the pumps, give any money. That is something that GB Energy could step in now. The DCO expired. So that project would have to start absolutely from scratch. It seems madness. I mean, the Bristol Channel in South Wales has the second highest tidal rise and fall in the world after Alaska, bizarrely. And yet we make nothing of that, and it's always on, it's always generating. So that's a very good point. And it's one thing we haven't mentioned up here, is the cost of electricity. I mean, I've been trading UK power for 20 years. During that time, UK baseload has been between 20 and 40% more expensive than continental power, and that is a huge economic break. So yeah, renewables offer that economic imperative as well.
So on the data centre point, I believe in America they're just reopening nuclear power plants in order to power some of the data centres that Microsoft have built. But it's not just a data centre problem, it's an electricity problem. So as we transition to electric vehicles, obviously we will have more data centres, in a small part driven by AI. There are all sorts of challenges in that system, so we're going to need more electricity, and we're going to have to respond to that problem.
We can cut the consumption of energy by 90%.
That too, but we're also going to need to work out how to get more electricity into the grid. And then on the point around SMRs, so we are going to need SMRs in order to create the baseload capacity that then mitigates against the challenges of wind and solar, and that's why South Yorkshire is in the business of SMRs, and that's why we've got this relationship with Holtec, with Rolls-Royce and others, because that's going to be a big part of the energy mix, and that's what that GBN competition is all about. All I would say is there is always going to be a viability gap. There is always going to have to be a space for government in investing in some of these technologies to get them over the line, to get them to viability. That's where MCAs can come in working with the government and investors in order to make sure that we are all kind of benefiting from that and those investments are going into the right place. But it is more broadly across this space always going to be a challenge for the government, for us to invest in these things and pick the right projects to invest in. A colleague of mine says that all too often it's not about government picking winners, it's about losers picking government, and that is the challenge that we have to overcome. How are we making sure the investments are going into the right space, the right place, the right companies, in order to drive this transition going forward in the right way?
Well, I'll come to Lorraine's point. I mean, I think what we need is the plan, and that's what we haven't had, have we? It hasn't been coordinated because, you know, what's happening around this part of the world, Merseyside, in terms of tidal, etc., the Bristol Channel that Mark just referred to, which borders my West of England region, of course. A whole range of different things are going on, and we need to coordinate that because it is kind of odd how everything seems to be, you know, a little bit, I've heard a little bit, Mark's mentioned something, and so it goes on. That can't be right because we've got so much in common. You know, we just need to share that and work together. So that's what I hope British Energy is going to do, is bring us all together. I've been trying to work with the Welsh Government about the tidal stuff in the Bristol Channel, because, you know, twice these huge changes in tidal levels, reliably twice a day. Doesn't matter if the wind blows or not, it's going to happen. You can rely on it. Never been possible in the past because no lagoons, dams, etc. Huge amounts of concrete, so that's environmentally dodgy and what have you. All the mud that's in the Bristol Channel doesn't make that flow very good. However, there's new technologies that are like kite things that are sort of secured to the seabed underneath the water. It's a wire as well. As it meanders in the flow, it creates electricity. Doesn't look bad, and all the silt goes over it rather than blocking it up. So it's getting quite an exciting time. I think we're probably close to doing some exciting things in my area, and no doubt where you are, Lorraine, and elsewhere. And we've just got to work together, I think.
Great. Well, I think that we'll draw things to a conclusion there. We've had thank you so much to our panellists for your wonderful responses, and thank you for everyone for taking part. Enjoy your conference.